As a competitive free-to-play, I don't think guides and support card tier lists are actually that helpful for this type of account, with card availability and their limit breaks heavily influencing what should be used. Many content creators will make recommendations that are basically use your Kitasan and borrow Super Creek or Fine Motion, and stuff your deck with these SRs. But what do you do when you have none of the meta SRs and your SRs have high limit break variability, if they even exist in your account? Initially, I was going to make a guide to using the support card tier list by Euphorus, which dynamically evaluates the cards based on what is already in your deck and lets you adjust based on limit break. While I was working on that, I realized it's too complicated to evaluate cards in a vacuum without a guide on how they fit into the overall training composition. I'll just briefly cover who I am and the general goal of this YouTube account. I go by Malcolm or For the Thrills when I'm online. This advice will be as an unlucky competitive free-to-play that did not reroll. Until the Kitasan banner, I had no non-welfare SSR card above 1 limit break, and even now, the only one is MLB Kita. I have only 23 Umas, and the options on what to run was also limited. And even surviving in team trials was difficult with only having Haru Urara for the first like 2 months of the game as a dirt Uma. I run a non-conglomerate top 100 club wing knight and have been in graded League A every CM with a record of 3 first places, 2 second places, and 1 third. I've also been in tier 6 team trials for as long as possible on my account. I didn't start at launch, so it's about 2 weeks less than the maximum I could have been. I'm looking to provide insight and advice on how to succeed competitively as a free-to-play with a bricked account. What I want to cover today, as I've mentioned, is creating a competitive deck composition under the limitations of a free-to-play for Champions Meet. It's going to be a guide on how to select number, types, and specific cards relating directly to your incomplete free-to-play decks and what you're going to be looking for in testing them. General card tier lists are only so useful for free-to-plays, with a number of limit breaks heavily influencing what is best. This is how to generate account-specific builds on your own instead of blindly listening to content creators with something general like 3 speed, 1 stam, 1 wit, 1 friend for the CM. Build creation is actually the part of the game I personally enjoy the most. The Boros slot and parents introduce so many possibilities and make the game a very deep strategy roguelike, in my opinion. The first thing to cover is how stats can be influenced and your UMA can be trained to reach certain stat distributions and targets. There are 4 main and 4 minor factors for this. Main factors are specifically what you're going to be directly changing to match the stat spread you're targeting. The 4 main factors would be UMA-specific stat growth bonuses. The second main factor is the 5 cards from your borrowed that you'll actually own and bring from your own account. The borrow card slot, which is significantly stronger than any of your 5 cards. And the type of blue attribute sparks you'll bring, or you'll try to bring. Minor factors are essentially limitations to what blue sparks you can actually end up using, because you need to take into account other aspects to your final UMA. So the main ones being pink aptitude sparks, so you'll want that distance S. Green unique sparks, an inherited alti might be absolutely required. White scenario sparks, Ura finales, and Unity cups are always very powerful for a high roll, and must have white skill sparks like straightaway spurt or groundwork. The borrow card and parent are very flexible and will be used to fix the limitations on your deck, as you essentially have access to any card in the game and the best parents anyone in the world has made that fulfills what you're looking to get out of it. The general deck composition steps would be identifying your anchor cards, targeting stats, what you think your UMA should reach, generating uh, your deck, getting the specific cards rather than the general types of cards, and then testing that UMA, both whether it matches your stats that you're looking to hit and whether those stat distribution actually leads to winning. No matter how free to play or well you are, all decks will include at least 2 speed cards for both currently released global scenarios, Ura Finale, and Unity Cup. For CM Aces, you'll always make them on the newest scenario. The new scenarios simply just power creep the older scenarios, so it doesn't really make sense to use older scenarios, and you will most likely just lose to someone playing on the new scenario. The first anchor will be your best speed card. For a good portion of players, this will be a 3LB or MLB Kitasan, but it doesn't have to be. In my example, you can see that my anchor card used to be a 1LB Biko Pegasus. And this is what I brought to the Libra Cup for a couple rounds. I did end up with something better, but I have since glued it because it didn't have good inheritances, and the cup was over. But this is kind of an example of what you could have hit. The next type of anchor you would have are cards that are significantly the best cards on your account. So these could be something like a 3LB Fine Motion or an MLB Super Creek. You may not necessarily have a card in this category, and I did not. Scenario-specific cards. So friend cards going forward on that scenario are going to be very powerful. So Rico is really good in Unity Cup, and if you have an MLB-R or 1LB plus SSR Rico, that's probably going to be an anchor card that you're always going to bring. And then the last type of anchor is style-specific cards. These may or may not be in your deck. You might need to anchor it into the borrow slot, and that's okay. An example of one in your deck would be the Welfare Wit Mahono Bourbon for frontrunners, because taking the lead is mandatory for them. An example of one that may not be in your deck could be an MLB Nice Nature. If you're running a late surger and you really need on your left, another one could be if you want to reduce variance on frontrunner builds. And although I don't recommend it, you could put Smart Falcon for guaranteed groundwork, and that could be an anchor into your borrow slot. So I'll quickly go over a quick view of going through these steps. I will most likely make a video going in more detail. This is for a front for Scorpio Cup, specifically Amaru. So these are my 3 anchor cards: Kitasan, because now I have an MLB Kitasan, Rico, and Mahono Bourbon. The first thing you're going to look at is the target stats for that you're going to try to hit on every run, so that the only RNG comes down to getting the distance S and hopefully high rolled stats while you do it. And then you want these stats to be on the average side of what you run, so that if you low roll on a specific stat, it won't glue your entire UMA. So if you high rolled on like speed and power, but you low rolled on stamina, it would be glue if your stamina target isn't high enough. The first step would be to grab your Team Trials Ace from that distance and put these stats and skills into an Umulator and drop every stat by 50, since the Team Trials Ace would likely be a high roll. I'll put a link in the description to the fork by Catchy that I use. Compare and see what the spurt rate and survival rate are. And then you're going to increase or decrease stamina until you get between 90 to 95% spurt rate and 70 to 90% survival rate. You will most likely want to remove any recoveries in the skills that you are not planning on getting on your CM UMA. This Umulator fork does account for rushed, but it will not do debuffers or spot struggle. So you may want to put debuffs on UMA 2 if you anticipate that or want to plan around it. When you're trying to increase or decrease stamina to hit the spurt rate and survival rates, you're going to modify uh, power at a 1-to-1 with stamina, or wit at a 1 to 1.5. In extreme cases, you could modify speed at a 1-to-1, but this is only going to be for really weak accounts or on a 3,000 plus meter long. Try to keep an absolute baseline of 600 power and 400 wit. Next, if speed is under 1150, you're going to increase that to 1150 following the same rules of 1-to-1 and 1.5 to 1 on wit. There is a mistake on this slide. It should be 1.5 on wit. Then lastly, as a free to play, power and wit are truly luxury stats. This is where if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. Speed and stamina always comes first. But when that's handled, then you can look at your power and your wit. And you would adjust them using the same guidelines. 1 power is 1.5 wit. Power is useful for acceleration and uphills. So if the course has a lot of uphills, like Libra, you may want to increase it at the cost of wit. Further, backliners have a higher top speed on the final spurt, so acceleration is generally better for them, which means power is better for them. Similarly, wit is useful for skill activation, position keep, and downhills. So if the course has a lot of downhills, like Scorpio, then you may want to increase it at the cost of power. Frontliners also really need to use their abilities, like taking the lead in groundwork to accelerate in the opening leg to get that lead. So wit is generally a lot better for them. So these are the target stats for the Maru example. These stats aren't meant to be, these stats are meant to be hit on every run unless something disastrous happens, like losing a unity race and having facilities underleveled, or low rolling events really hard, like 2 or more mood downs and like 2 or more failed trainings. But generally, every run you should be hitting your target stats, and then you're only looking to roll the distance S. So the target for the Maru was 850 stamina. So these are the ways that I found on my account I can hit 850 stamina. I can borrow Super Creek, I can use SSR Rico and Stam Sparks, or I can use R Rico and 2 stamina bonus power cards. Then these were the subset of ways that I know my account can hit 1150 speed, the second important target in my stats. And that was 2 speed and 3 wit, 2 speed, speed sparks, and 2 wit, or just 3 speed cards. Likely, if your account is weak and doesn't have an MLB Kitasan, you'll probably add another speed card and maybe be able to remove some of the wits. Because if you saw my Libra Ace, I used 4 speed because I actually couldn't reach that level of speed without 4 cards at that time. So mixing those two, this is how those stamina lineups could have been updated to include the speed requirements. I could add 2 more speed cards to the first lineup, or I could add 2 speeds to the second lineup, or I could add 1 speed and 2 wit. Then this is a concept you're going to need when choosing lineups that work and filling out final question marks, like in the second lineup. 1 card in a category is generally only acceptable in 2 cases. It must either be a best in slot SSR, like Super Creek or Fine Motion, or Super Creek or Fine Motion, or it must be an effective roamer. Roaming cards are cards that aren't really needed to boost the stat of its category and are effective at boosting all stats, mainly through training effectiveness when paired with other support cards on other categories, but it can also be just generally through race bonus affecting your career goal rewards and optional race stats. An effective roamer is not needed for its associated stat, 0 to mid specialty priority of 35 or below, so they can go to other categories more frequently. high training effectiveness and race bonus combined to be 25% or more, and to a lesser degree, so it's not as important, but it is nice if it has mood effect or skill point bonus or initial stats. Uh, Not meeting all of these cutoffs, you could still consider it a good roamer, but if it passes all of them, it is definitely a good roamer. So ultimately, following those rules, I arrived at the second step because I don't have a wit card strong enough to fit that solo roaming position. So that's why I settled on 2B as my lineup. So this is kind of a brief introduction to the support card tier list. The tier list does have a couple caveats, which is the major shortfall is it doesn't consider skills and will purely judge stats, and those stats will be based off the settings that you can adjust. So a clear example where the stats matter, or where the skills matter, sorry, is Agnes Tachyon, which has entirely medium-based skills. Even if she's not the highest rated, you could consider her for a medium race. And even if she is the highest, someone with better skills might be considered over her in other distances. I would selectively evaluate the results of the tier list with a score differential of around 50 or less, but up to 100 could be considered, but the skill difference has to be massive. So the first step in using it is adjusting the settings for your specific UMA and career. I'll just cover a few of the important settings because there are a lot of settings, and if there's interest, I can cover it in more detail. Scenario bond rate will simulate how many support cards you're training with on an average day. This will effectively adjust the value of initial friendship. I would suggest raising it to 14 if running a deck with two main types of cards, like the 2 wit, 3 speed, 1 pal card I am running. But leaving it at the default 10 is good if you have a bigger variety of cards. Optional races are going to simulate the value of race bonus. So every race you run will typically provide less stats than training, but it is the most efficient way to gain skill points. So I would typically do 2 or 3 races because in Unity, the Spirit Explosions give you a lot of useful hints, and you're going to feel strapped for skill points at the end typically. So when the trainings are weak, I try to take optional races for the required SP. I wouldn't take any OP pre-OP races. I'm only considering graded races here, and so for the setting, I would put 2 G1s and 2 optional G2, G3s. So now I'm going to go over using the tier list of picking the specific cards. So in the top right, I have the cards that are on my account now, and I put them into the Umalator with the cards that I have used as in the lineup committedly, and I end up taking King Halo. In Wit, because Agnes Tachyon is close to Ikuno Dictus, I actually end up taking Matikane and Agnes instead of Matikane and Ikuno. And the final lineup looks like this. So after you've have your lineup, I did a test run, and these are the results I got from it. It did feel like a high roll. I hit a lot of my inherits, and I had good trainings. But this is the first example of using this deck. In my late surger example that I'm planning on doing, you'll see what it looks like when the trainings don't go right or the deck composition used doesn't even end up doing what I want it to do. And the evaluation at this step isn't going to be about if this UMA is good. It is specifically, does this UMA match the stats that I am targeting on what feels like an average roll? So if it feels like a high roll, it should be higher than these stats. If it feels like a low roll, it should be lower than these stats. But if the luck was altered, would it hit these stats? If you are satisfied with reaching these target stats, then you can move on to testing the actual UMA in practice. And if you aren't, you could go back to the deck composition selection and pick a different type of deck, or you could just make micro adjustments to the one you're using. So maybe you brought stamina sparks and you ended up a little bit low on power, but you had way too much stamina. So you might want to switch it to power sparks. Or you're using a power bonus power card, and maybe you'll switch that to a stamina bonus power card. Some small adjustments like that if it's not quite hitting the stats you want to target. Then you want to try room matches with UMAs from public lobbies or ones that are shared as practice partners in your club. They won't necessarily win, and you just want to check the winning UMAs, and that might help you make adjustments to what you want your UMA to do. It might be that you don't have certain inherited alties that they have, or they have different stat distributions. Try to, if you're using public lobbies, try not to use stat monster UMAs as your example and just focus on UMAs that are more in your stat budget. So check the cards that they used, and if it's something you could reasonably make, by all means, make adjustments based on that. But if they're using a deck of 4 SSR MLB cards, that's not realistically something you could make, then it's not exactly going to help you. If everything feels right, and even if it didn't necessarily win, then I would say keep training with this build and just look to try to hit that run where you end up with distance S or a stat high roll, and that might be the difference that makes this UMA win. So that is my presentation on a build composition guide. Thank you.